Cops arrested a black woman for a fake check, not knowing she was an undercover FBI agent. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon when a black woman stepped into a quiet suburban bank. She carried herself with calm confidence, dressed neatly in a dark blazer and jeans, her expression neutral yet alert. She approached the teller's window and handed over a check with a polite smile. The teller looked at the check, her brow furrowing for a moment before she excused herself and walked quickly into the manager's office. The woman waited patiently, unaware that within minutes her entire day would turn into a public humiliation. 2 uniformed police officers entered the bank, their hands already resting on their holsters. They approached her with a sense of authority that reeked of assumption. One officer barked, demanding that she step back from the counter. Confused but composed, she asked what was going on, her voice even and calm. Without answering, one officer grabbed her arm while the other twisted her wrist behind her back, slamming her against the glass partition. Customers turned their heads, whispering and recording with their phones. The officers shouted that the check she was trying to cash was fake, claiming the bank had reported her for attempted fraud. The woman's purse fell to the floor, its contents spilling across the tiles. A wallet, car keys, a phone, and a small leather badge holder that went completely unnoticed. She didn't resist, didn't argue. Her silence seemed to irritate them more, and one officer muttered something about thinking she could outsmart the system. She was escorted out of the bank as people stared, their eyes filled with judgment and curiosity. The humiliation burned deep, but she kept her head high, her gaze steady. At the police station, the officers continued to mock her, joking about how calm she seemed for a criminal. They processed her paperwork, fingerprinted her, and began running her ID through the system. That's when the first officer's smirk started to fade. The computer screen blinked and froze for a second before displaying something that made his face drain of color. The name on the record came up as an active federal agent. Federal Bureau of Investigation. The room went completely silent. The same woman they'd just handcuffed in public for a fake check was an undercover FBI agent on an active operation. Moments later, their captain rushed in, his expression tightening when he saw her. She finally spoke, her voice sharp but controlled, asking if this was how they treated every citizen or just black women. The captain tried to apologize, but she cut him off, explaining that the check was part of a federal sting operation involving bank fraud and corruption, and that the teller who reported her was under investigation for embezzlement. The realization hit like a bomb. Within hours, FBI agents arrived, confiscated the security footage, and arrested the teller. The officers who arrested her faced internal investigation. As she walked out, free and dignified, the same people who mocked her now avoided her gaze. She left without a word, knowing justice had already begun. The sunlight hit her face as the officers dragged her out of the bank, their grip firm and unrelenting. She didn't struggle or shout, just walked silently as the crowd gathered around, phones out, capturing every humiliating second. A few people whispered, assuming she was some sort of criminal trying to cash a fake check. One of the officers sneered at her, making a cruel remark about how she must have thought she was smarter than everyone else. She didn't answer, didn't even blink. Her silence wasn't fear, it was control. She knew exactly what she was doing. As they shoved her into the back seat of the squad car, she glanced toward the bank entrance one last time, her eyes resting briefly on the teller who had called the police. There was something in that woman's expression. Not concern, but guilt, the kind that hides behind a smirk. The ride to the police station was filled with mocking laughter. The officers joked about how calm she seemed, wondering if she was too stunned to realize the trouble she was in. One said she must be used to handcuffs. The other chuckled, saying she didn't look like the type, but that you never really know with people these days. She sat silently in the back seat, her mind calculating, her eyes watching every street they turned onto. When they reached the station, they led her inside and forced her to sit on a hard metal chair. One of them began typing her details into the system while the other took her fingerprints. They laughed between themselves, calling her Miss Smooth and Fake Check Lady. Still, she didn't say a word. Then something changed. The officer typing her name frowned at the computer screen. He backspaced, retyped, and waited again. The system paused, processing. The smirk on his face began to fade as the screen loaded her full identification. The next second, the color drained from his face. He leaned closer to read the words on the screen, his voice trembling as he whispered to his partner. The other officer stepped forward, confused, until he too saw the text blinking across the monitor. Federal Bureau of Investigation, active field agent. The room went dead silent. Every officer nearby stopped what they were doing. The woman slowly lifted her eyes, watching the fear spread across their faces. The captain was called immediately. He rushed into the room, his expression darkening the moment he saw her. Before he could even speak, she said in a calm, cutting voice, "You just interfered with a federal operation." The officers exchanged terrified looks. Realizing they hadn't just arrested an innocent woman, they had jeopardized an active FBI investigation. The captain tried to apologize, but she didn't want apologies. Her silence spoke louder than anything. She stood slowly, her presence commanding the room. In that instant, they understood exactly who they were dealing with. Not a suspect, but a woman far above their authority, and one who would make sure every single one of them was held accountable for what they had done. The air in the police station grew heavy, every sound swallowed by the tension that filled the room. The officers who had mocked her moments ago now stood frozen, their confidence drained away. The computer screen still glowed with her profile, her photo, credentials, and the bold letters beneath her name, Federal Bureau of Investigation, active field agent. The silence stretched until one of the officers nervously stepped back, his hands trembling as he called for the captain. When the captain entered, his steps slowed the moment he saw her. Recognition hit instantly and the color faded from his face. The woman, still in handcuffs, turned her head slightly, her calm gaze meeting his. Without raising her voice, she asked, "Is this how you treat citizens, or is this just how you treat black women?" Her words were steady, cutting through the room like glass. No one dared to speak. The captain opened his mouth to apologize, but she interrupted, her tone sharper now, every word laced with authority. She explained that she was working undercover on a federal fraud investigation targeting a criminal network that had been funneling counterfeit checks through local banks. The check she'd handed to the teller was not fake, it was evidence, a part of a sting operation meant to expose corrupt employees. The very teller who had called the police on her had now exposed herself as a suspect, jeopardizing months of federal work. As the weight of her words settled in, the officers exchanged terrified glances. They realized they hadn't just humiliated a woman. They had compromised an active FBI operation. The captain quickly moved to remove her handcuffs, stuttering apologies. But she remained still, her calm composure making the entire room feel smaller. She didn't shout or threaten. She didn't need to. Her presence alone was enough to make every officer in that station understand how deeply they had crossed a line. One of the younger officers looked pale, whispering under his breath, "We're finished." The cameras in the room had recorded everything, their aggressive arrest, their mocking tone, and now their shocked silence. The agent looked around slowly, her eyes scanning each face, memorizing every detail. Then, without another word, she demanded access to the recording and the name of the teller who initiated the call. Her authority left no room for argument. Within minutes, the precinct was a blur of movement. Officers scrambling to comply, phones ringing, and the captain pacing nervously. The atmosphere shifted from arrogance to fear. The reality was undeniable. The people who had treated her like a criminal were about to answer to her agency. As she stood waiting, one thing was clear. She didn't need revenge. The system would handle that for her. The moment the FBI arrived to collect the evidence, the entire station would be under review. The captain knew it, and so did every officer who had been part of the arrest. They watched in silence as she stood tall, still and composed, embodying a quiet power that none of them could match. The woman they had dismissed was not their equal. She was their reckoning. Within hours, black SUVs with tinted windows surrounded the small-town police station, their engines humming low as federal agents stepped out with badges glinting in the afternoon sun. The local officers who had mocked and humiliated her earlier now stood frozen, watching as the FBI entered with quiet authority. The atmosphere turned heavy with fear and regret. The agent, now free from her handcuffs, stood in the corner, silent and composed, as her colleagues took control of the scene. They confiscated security footage, arrest records, and every document connected to her wrongful detainment. The teller who had made the false claim was brought in for questioning, her earlier confidence replaced by visible panic. Within minutes, the truth began to unfold. She had been part of a larger fraud ring that the undercover agent had been investigating for months. The irony was sharp. The same woman who had accused the agent of fraud had exposed her own guilt to the entire world. The story broke that same evening, spreading through every major news network. "Local police arrest undercover FBI agent for fake check," the headline screamed. The footage from the bank, showing officers manhandling her without cause, went viral. Public outrage grew fast. The police chief was suspended, the arresting officers placed under internal investigation, and the department's reputation crumbled overnight. Citizens protested outside the precinct, demanding accountability. What had started as a quiet banking errand had now become a national scandal exposing racial bias and reckless policing. Reporters swarmed the station, trying to get a glimpse of the woman at the center of it all, but she was nowhere to be found. She had already left, escorted quietly by federal agents back to headquarters, her mission far from over. Inside the moving black vehicle, she looked out of the window, her reflection calm but determined. She wasn't angry anymore. She was resolved. The world had seen her handcuffed, but it would also see her rise. Her story wasn't just about a wrongful arrest. It was a mirror showing how deeply prejudice could run, even in the simplest of places. The same officers who once laughed at her now feared to even meet her eyes. Justice, she knew, wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, and the truth was finally out. Days later, the teller's confession tied several bank employees to a regional fraud network, leading to multiple arrests. The undercover operation she had started months earlier was now complete, though not in the way she had planned. Still, it ended in justice. When she walked back into the FBI field office, her colleagues greeted her with quiet respect. She had endured humiliation and turned it into proof that strength isn't about how loud you fight, it's about how long you stand. Her badge was more than authority. It was a reminder that no matter how the world tried to doubt her, she was unbreakable. The woman they tried to disgrace walked away undefeated, her head held high, knowing that this time the system itself had been forced to answer to her.